Vilgax says that maybe Garlax has learned to fight after all, as he charged towards them, with the latter saying that he had no thanks to him, before swinging one of the poles he'd ripped off of the gate and slammed it into their side, breaking it in half, while the former growled and grabbed him by the face and slammed him into the ground, telling him that it was for his own good. Garlax then grabbed his arm, wrapping one of his around the tyrant's wrist, as he then began slamming his fist into the outer side of his elbow, over and over, until they'd lifted him up and thrown him from the pain that was caused from nearly breaking their arm. Growling, Vilgax told them that they had no choice in that matter, growling that it was not his decision to make. Our crewmate then growled back that they always had a choice, and that they just threw him aside when he got remarried, throwing him out, only caring for his new family he was starting. Vilgax then yells out that it wasn't like that. It was something he simply couldn't do because of someone more important than himself that wanted it that way. Growing angry, Garlax then said there's no one more important to him than himself. Who could possibly have any sway over him to make things like the way they were? Exactly. To which the tyrant responded that it was Garlax's mother whom requested upon her dying breath that he not raise them to take over his empire, and promised that their son would reach adulthood. They stopped listening to that, hearing that it was actually his mother's wish that he not take over, but then got angry, demanding to know why she would request such a thing. To which Vilgax then answered that it was the day he was born. Things were going normally at first, but on their way to the medical facility to prepare for his birth, they were ambushed by some of his enemies. Going on, he continued to explain that Garlax's mother was wounded in the ensuing battle, and she feared for the child's life, and the stress had caused complications, making her go into labor prematurely. They'd managed to make it into the medical facility with the guards taking down the remnants of the enemies that attacked them, and they did everything they could to fortify the facility for their safety. They paused as the story actually seemed to be upsetting the planetary ruler, as they see flashes of sorrow slowly making their presence known upon his face, though Garlax demanded that he continued to explain. With another deep breath, Vilgax then continued to tell them about what happened the day they were born, and why he'd done what he did when they were growing up. Vilgax then sighed softly, telling Garlax that they managed to save him, but his mother had succumbed to the stress and her injuries. But before her passing, they begged that he would never put their son through all that, and he'd promised that he wouldn't. Having both of them declared as deceased so as to protect them, he did what he could for his son without letting people know that he was his offspring. Garlax needed to process this, but he wasn't about to let a fight go unfinished, and he and Vilgax continued fighting one another until Garlax could no longer stand on his own, with Ben calling out that this fight was over. The planetary ruler had then helped up his offspring, telling them to stand tall. They fought to the end as a true warrior. He was a true son of Vilgax. They told Vilgax that he needed time to process all this, and so they got him off to a room, along with the rest of the crew being allowed to stay at the castle as well. Gwen asked Ben what happened out there, and he told her that the two got it out of their system and they should start working things out soon. She'd sighed, saying that's good at least. To which Ben agreed with them. They then went off to bed, and the next day the guards had told the crew that they were requested at breakfast, and so they all went to do that. Things were actually less tense between Garlax and Vilgax this morning, as they seem to have been working through their problem. The planetary leader then told Garlax that he would like to officially declare, now that he is adult, their relation to their people. Garlax dropped his eating utensil onto his plate, looking a bit surprised at that, and didn't seem sure at first, looking to the others for advice, as Reverb showed no change in emotion, but then he never did. Ben simply shrugged, with Gwen not sure herself either. Rojo wasn't much help, as she wasn't paying attention to the conversation, more interested in breakfast. Though Luma nodded in response to the idea, thinking they could work it out. After thinking it over for a moment and looking back at Vilgax, seeing his half-sister and her mother there as well, he then let out a soft sigh and nodded in agreement, saying that they could after they finished breakfast and he had a chance to get cleaned up. He still reeks from last night, making Brix giggle a bit, smiling, seeing that they weren't fighting anymore, though she still hadn't completely put it all together just yet. Nodding in agreement to that, they continued eating breakfast, though a lot more comfortably, as the atmosphere around them started to relax a lot more, with all that tension fading, thankfully. They finished breakfast and then went to get cleaned up and to prepare for whatever was going on soon. And after the guards had started the process of the citizens spreading the word of Vilgax having some sort of announcement soon, the citizens were all curious as to what's going on. A short bit later, Vilgax was standing on a balcony with cameras transmitting all across the planet for their citizens to know what's going on. He then began to introduce Garlax, his son and firstborn, officially announcing that he was in fact the son of Vilgax to everyone, as the citizens were curious, and there was a lot of chatter as they looked on. Garlax was in a crown and cape tailored for him, and Brix was actually really excited hearing that she had a big brother, though he'd walked over to her and set the crown on her head and putting the cape around her despite it being too big before lifting her up, telling his half-sister that she was going to make a great ruler of Vilgaxia someday. Just don't grow up to be so grumpy like their father, while poking her in the center of her face, making her giggle. And the citizens, having seen that, laughed and decided that they liked this guy. Turning back to their father, our crew member then tells him that he can pass on his empire to Brix when the time comes. He's already got a throne waiting for him back on Koros with Luma. But first, they still had to take down Eon. Brix asked if her older brother would play with her, and Vilgax said that he would have the best crew on the planet work to fix their ship and cover the repair bill himself. Nodding in response to that, Garlax then smiled at Brix and said that they could play together, to which the young girl cheered, glad to hear that. And the two then began to go play together as the camera feed was cut, returning the screens and stuff back to whatever was on before the announcement was being made.